On May 2nd, 1941, a handful of spectators in a courtroom in Union City, Missouri, waited anxiously to hear a verdict. When the word guilty resounded through the charged air, the defendant showed no emotion. She simply blinked slowly at those around her as though she was completely unbothered. But our poisoner's story began long before that early spring day, and the consequences of her actions have reached far enough in time that living relatives of hers still won't eat a bowl of potato soup. Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha May Detective Agency. I'm Agatha May, and before we get into this episode, I want to say thank you for all the love and support about my decision to branch into other interests. I've decided that the channel name will stay the same, and along with true crime, we'll be investigating small-town America, ghost towns, haunted places, cemeteries, and more. Mr. Agatha and I went on an adventure this past Saturday, and I adventured myself down a few steps. I'm fine, just scraped and sore. Filming this first trip was definitely a learning experience. Enough blabbing, lady, get on with the story. Once upon a time, in a land of railroads and iron mines, a girl was born. The exact date of her birth was difficult to pin down, as I found no less than 6 dates contributed to when she entered this world. According to Find a Grave and the Family Search website, Emma Serrana Stennett was born on June 20th, 1883. According to the 1900 census, she was born in June 1891, and on the 1940 census, she was born in 1883. Her various marriage records also have her born at a variety of years, but in the local newspaper, her birth announcement reads that she was born on June 21st, 1890. I think that's her actual date of birth. I think the census taker back in 1900 could have asked her age and just filled in the year. However, I have no idea where the 1883 came from. Maybe Emma aged herself for her first marriage, since her husband was 15 years older than her. She definitely was born in Steelville, Missouri, to William Riley and Hattie Keeling Stennett. There are multiple places on the internet who have her father listed as Riley William, but he was William Riley, but he went by Riley. Emma had an older brother, William, and 2 younger sisters, Annie and Viola. Her brother died when he was 9 years old from a tragic accident. He was helping their father drive fence post when the head of the fence maul the father was using broke loose from the handle and struck the son in the head. He died days later from his injury. There isn't much known about Emma's childhood, other than the death of her brother. She would have been around 8 at the time that the accident happened, and I'm sure it must have had a profound effect on her. Her father had gone to the penitentiary before he ever married Emma's mother. He was sentenced to 2 years, but I was unable to learn why he went. In the late 1880s, he was working odd jobs for the city of Steelville, what seemed to be mostly construction jobs. And in 1894, there was a notice in the Crawford Mirror out of Steelville that Riley wanted to move to the country and till the ground. He did that, but by 1902 had moved back into town so his children could attend school. The family seemed to move every few years, but not so far that Emma wasn't able to find a man who wanted to be attached to her. That man was Charles Augustus Schwack. On February 20th, 1910, 20-year-old Emma Stennett stood in the home of her parents and became Mrs. Charles Schwack. Charles was a blacksmith and was well known and well liked in the town of Steelville. After their wedding, he and Emma settled into Charles's family home, where he had lived with his mother until she died. Although Emma would later say that she had 12 children with Charles, with 8 of them dying in infancy, there is no record of that. She would also later say that they were married when she was 14, which was just a big old lie. They had 4 daughters together between 1911 and 1920. Then, in 1925, Charles became ill. His illness was short-lived, not because he overcame it, but rather because he died from it. His death certificate listed dysentery as the cause of death. His date of death was July 15, 1925. On August 28, 1925, the home that Emma and Charles shared was auctioned due to the loan being in default. Emma didn't stay single for long, though. By April of the next year, she had married 45-year-old George Burroughs in St. Louis, Missouri. I couldn't find anyone else who has researched Emma that has listed George as her second husband, but he definitely was lucky number two, at least until he was decidedly unlucky. George died on July 12, 1926, a little less than a year from the death of Emma's first husband. On January 28, 1927, 37-year-old Emma was walking down the aisle again to marry 38-year-old Frank A. Lee in East St. Louis, Illinois. Emma would later say that this husband ran off. And after looking at all of Emma's marriages, I have to wonder if maybe he ran off to the cemetery. I wasn't able to find any information on Frank and Emma other than that they were married, and even that was tough to find. And if Frank ran off, as Emma says, then there probably wasn't ever a divorce, which makes the rest of her marriages null and void and makes Emma a bigamist, which would be one of her more endearing qualities. On January 15, 1931, Emma, who was now 40, married 61-year-old engineer Frank Joseph Bremser in St. Louis, Missouri. Their marriage was short-lived. Frank died on May 13, 1931, from internal injuries after an alleged fall from a 4-foot stepladder. However, the only witness to said fall was Emma, and she quickly had Frank's body cremated. She never claimed his cremains either, which I think shows how little she cared about Frank and how little she cared about making any show that she cared. And in almost 100 years, no one else has claimed the cremains of Frank, which I think is incredibly sad. They are still in storage at Valhalla Cemetery. So if any family of Frank's is listening, or if you know any of Frank's family, they can call Valhalla at 314-863-3011 and finally give Frank a better resting place than a shelf in a storage room at a cemetery. Emma didn't have a bare ring finger for long. She married Albert Lee Roberts in January of 1933, but it was another brief union. By July 21st, 1933, Bert was dead. According to Emma, he had contracted food poisoning from a can of sardines. I think maybe that's another one of Emma's porkies, though. Emma's mother-in-law, Myra King, had sustained a broken hip and moved in with Bert and Emma at their home in Cuba. She died just a few months before Bert on March 25, 1933. Later, relatives would say that she'd become ill after eating a bowl of Emma's potato soup. And I might have found another of Emma's husbands that hasn't been on any other record. On October 19, 1934, an Emma Roberts from Cuba, Missouri, married a James V. Smith in St. Louis. Emma and James lived with his parents, Dr. Owie and Rebecca Smith, at 4115 West Pine in St. Louis. The May before their marriage, Dr. Smith was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for illegally selling narcotics, but was able to get parole instead of serving any time. And on March 5th of 1935, his wife Rebecca died at the age of 68. I was unable to discover what happened to James, and Emma Roberts seemed to have just vanished into thin air. By November of 35, the residents of 4115 West Pine were selling off furniture sets. I can't say for sure that Emma Roberts is the same woman as our Emma, but I have a suspicion it was. And while I'm suspicioning, I'd say Emma might have helped another mother-in-law along the way to death's door. Next on Emma's list of husbands was lucky fellow William Vaughn, and he truly was lucky. They met at a carnival in 1934, and by the next year, Emma was working as William's housekeeper at his home in Cuba, Missouri. They married on October 29, 1935, with Emma reverting to Schwack as her surname, and by October 20th, 1937, their marriage was over. But it wasn't because of death. It was a nice, everyday divorce. There were rumors that the only thing that saved Billy Boy's life is that he refused to name Emma as the beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Emma, now 46 and at least 6 husbands in, waited an entire 9 days before marrying her next husband/victim. 53-year-old Aloysius Anton Schneider, who went by Aloys, they married on October 29, 1937. He and Emma lived in St. Peters, Missouri, where Aloys was president of the Bank of St. Peters. And in February 1938, he retired from banking after 33 years. He spent his free time farming, But in September of 1939, Alois became ill, and after 2 weeks of illness, his condition worsened, and he was taken to the hospital on September 19th, 1939, where he died 2 hours later. 8 months later, the body of Alois would be exhumed. While researching Alois, I noticed that after he and Emma were married, there were mentions of him and his daughter visiting family, but there was never any mention that Emma went with them. And in his obituary, she was only referred to as his wife. Her name was never used. It makes me think that there could have been some resentment from his children towards Emma, and more than likely not without good reason. Not wanting to let her ring finger get too cold, Emma married her final husband on April 18th, 1940, 57-year-old farmer Anton Joseph Heppermann, Jr., who went by Tony. They met when Emma placed an ad in the newspaper advertising she was available for a housekeeping position. Her ad read, "Woman, housekeeper for motherless home, neat, pleasant, age 46, Emma Lee, 1419 South Vandeventer." Tony was living in Wentzville, Missouri, which is now one of the fastest growing suburbs of St. Louis, but at the time there were a mere 752 inhabitants compared to the over 48,000 it has today. He answered Emma's ad and invited her to have a look at his farm. She did and told him that she liked the place, but that she was actually looking for a husband. She told him she would come work for him for 2 weeks, and if he liked her and wanted to get married, they could. If not, she'd return to St. Louis, and he wouldn't owe her a shiny nickel. Tony's brother Steve later said he tried to talk Tony out of marrying Emma, but she must have cleaned house and cooked like nobody's business, or maybe she did something else like nobody's business, because Tony told his brother that he was going to marry Emma, and he did, which was a mistake. Tony and Emma's marriage was the shortest on her list, at least the shortest that we know of. By the latter part of May, Tony became ill and was hospitalized on May 26, 1940, and that was the end of Emma's life as a blushing bride. After Aloysius Snyder's untimely death, the residents of St. Peters, Missouri began talking. Gossip was exchanged over backyard clothesline. Whispers were heard in the line at the post office, and all of the talking was about Emma and if she had anything to do with the death of Aloysius. So police began investigating. They spoke with Tony's family and learned that they were also suspicious of the death of Emma's last husband and of Tony's illness. On May 27th, Emma was arrested on suspicion of attempting to poison Tony. It didn't take long before the charge was changed to murder. Tony died at the hospital on May 28th, 1940. During the questioning, Emma swore she hadn't done anything to harm Tony. She was an innocent little lamb whose husbands just had the distasteful habit of dying on her. Emma told investigators that, "I never poisoned anybody, except 3 cats and 1 dog." Well, yikes on bikes, Emma. I know their times were different then, but maybe keep that to yourself. And Emma didn't know that while she sat in that small jail cell in St. Charles, investigators were searching her house and that they'd found arsenic in it, more than a normal amount. She didn't know that they'd exhumed the body of Aloysius Schneider and had sent some of his organs to be tested for arsenic, and were having Tony Heppermann's organs tested as well. After she was arrested, local newspapers published articles that there had been a coroner's jury that was held after the death of Bert Roberts. His doctor thought his death was from slowly being poisoned. A post-mortem at the hospital showed there was no poison in the stomach, so the jury gave the verdict of death caused by acute gastritis and nephritis. His organs were never tested. While investigators waited for the results of the lab work on her 2 latest husbands, Emma began talking. She told investigators of her past husbands, at least some of them. She lied and said she'd married her first husband when she was only 14, and that Charles had died of dysentery because he drank ice water after becoming overheated. She mentioned Frank Lee and simply said he'd left her. She also mentioned Bert and his can of bad sardines, Bill who divorced her, and Aloysius and Tony. During the investigation, Emma's neighbors told of times when Emma told them that she was so worried about Bert because he kept eating tomatoes and other vegetables that had been sprayed with arsenic. Emma, that is the most obvious attempt to cover up a crime. You didn't even try. Investigators also learned that Tony's 13-year-old daughter Ethel had been ill about 3 weeks. Thankfully, Ethel recovered and lived to be 80 years old. On June 6, 1940, a coroner's jury sat for 3 hours listening to evidence in the deaths of Aloysius Schneider and Tony Heppermann. Evidence of insurance policy paid to Emma on Aloy's death came to light. She was also set to inherit a portion of the proceeds from the sale of his farm. She was set to inherit Tony's 92-acre farm and had tried to get him to sell it before he came ill. Perhaps his refusal to sell is why she poisoned him. A store clerk testified that Emma had bought a pound can of insect spray a few days before Tony became ill, insect spray with arsenic in it. The doctor who attended Tony told the jury that Tony had told him that he was convinced Emma was poisoning the potato soup she made for him. According to his brother, when Tony was taken to the hospital, he said, "My God, who would have thought she would poison me? Why, I was good to her. Where is she now?" When told that she was in jail, the sick man said, "I hope they keep the blank blank there." And I'm not censoring that. The newspaper actually had blanks. So feel free to use your imagination as to what Tony called Emma. Tony's daughter Ethel told the jury that she had been sick for about 3 weeks and had lost 23 pounds. She said that whenever she felt nauseated, Emma would tell her to have some more potato soup. There was also testimony that arsenic was found in the organs of both Aloysius and Tony, and the amount was sufficient enough to have killed them both. Alphonse Schneider, brother of Aloysius, testified that he and Emma had never gotten along. Quote, "She told me 3 times she wanted to kill me. One day, in the middle of a quarrel, she said she wanted to cook me some soup. I sure am glad I didn't eat any of that soup." End quote. Neighbors of Aloysius and Emma's told the jury that Emma would often tell them the same ridiculous line that Aloysius kept eating vegetables that had been sprayed with arsenic. On the advice of her attorney, Emma didn't testify. She was led back to her St. Charles County Jail, where she was later served with a warrant charging her with the first-degree murder of Tony Heppermann. Her trial for the murder charge of Tony began on April 28, 1941, almost a year after she was arrested. The same evidence that was brought to light at the coroner's jury was repeated at the trial. The prosecutors made it clear that Emma's motive for killing Tony was money. She wanted his land, his life insurance, and $1,000 in savings bonds. Altogether, Tony was worth about $167,000 in today's money, and Emma wanted it all. On May 2, 1941, Sarah Bowling wrote an article in the Franklin County Tribune out of Union, Missouri, describing Emma during her trial. Quote, "The defendant has cold blue eyes, which narrow and change focus behind her gold-rimmed spectacles while she is staring straight at a person. Her sleek white hair is cut short in the back. Today it is combed straight back from her forehead with a suggestion of a wave left by the tight little Vienna sausage rolls which framed her face on the opening day. She is dumpy and short, so short that she does not touch the floor with her feet, which occasionally move up and down, and her only nervous gesture. She is absolutely unmoved by the proceedings, unmoved except for a sly smile that sometimes pulls the corner of her mouth downward into tiny creases and disappears. She appraises the jury carefully, and when the package of flypaper was introduced into evidence and handed to each member for examination, her intentness suggested a cat with a mouse. If she were not on trial for her life, you would meet Emma Heppermann casually and think her a mild, capable sort of person who comes in when there is sickness in the family, the practical nurse, whose orders are obeyed because of her assurance. When you see her in the courtroom in custody of the sheriff and reflect that she has had 7 husbands, 5 of whom have died, and that she is on trial for poisoning the 7th, you may wonder what sort of woman this is." End quote. The same day that article was published, Emma Heppermann was found guilty of murdering Anton Joseph Heppermann. The state was asking for a death sentence, but the jury decided instead to sentence Emma to life in prison. Emma sat without any emotion on her face as the verdict and sentence were read. Emma's attorneys immediately filed a motion for a new trial, but was overruled by a judge. She took her appeal to the state Supreme Court, but in July of 1942, her life sentence was upheld. Emma was sent to the state penitentiary in Jefferson County, but that's not where her life ended. She became ill in prison, and at the end of her life, she was living at the Haven of Rest Nursing Home in Greentop, Missouri. There are accounts that she was released from prison due to her illness and was allowed to die outside the prison walls. And on October 20th, 1968, Emma Stennett, Schwack, Burroughs, Lee, Bremser, Roberts, maybe Smith, Vaughn, Schneider, Heppermann died. She was buried in an unmarked grave at Hillcrest Cemetery in Fulton, Missouri. The truth about how many marriages she actually had and how many lives she actually took died with her. We are now left to piece her story together as best we can. Thank you so much for joining me for another edition of Laced. Please like, share, and comment so more can learn about Emma's story and her potato soup of death. I'll be back soon with more investigating. Until then, stay safe and be happy.